And I'm quite convinced that like nobody with a national security clearance at the United States level knows more about the world of geopolitics than I do. Like at this point, nobody. There's nothing confidential information from the United States government could teach me other than like evil stuff that the US government has done that we don't know about yet. Like these people are idiots.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Marie, in charge of podcasting, and with me as always is Robert Morris. How are you this time?
Not bad, not bad. There's kind of a preliminary issue I wanted to chat about.
Okay, what's happening?
So today we're going to be talking about the malfeasance, just flat out idiocy of the Donald Trump foreign policy team. But there's like sort of like a kind of like a get out of jail free card, or like an approach that people are taking that is on the one hand supposed to be like, oh, this is really bad for America, but on the other hand is like kind of a consolation that I just think isn't true. Did you see that news a day or two back about how, oh, China, South Korea, and Japan are working together against Trump's tariffs?
Yeah. So it's basically saying about how he's letting on he's a great he's great at making deals, but yet he's managed to make everyone team up against him to counter his deals.
Yeah, and that sort of language is very satisfying. And the amount of stuff I've been seeing over the past weeks about this is it, American empire's over. The post-World War II era is 1945 to 2025. Blah, 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 blah. And yes, Donald Trump is bad for America, bad for the international rules-based order. But this kind of talk like, oh, all of a sudden Japan, South Korea, and China are great friends now, is just like, we don't have to be idiots here. Like, it's not like that's just not the case. U.S. empire is a lot more durable. And it's kind of fascinating. When that came out, I did sort of, I think, a little bit of the dutiful, like, oh, look at this. You look at what Trump has done to us. But very quickly, I was like, this is exaggerated nonsense. This is these countries got together and had a sort of pro-globalization, pro-free trade thing, which is what they do. And then a Chinese government source came out and said, oh, we're going to work together to retaliate against Trump's tariffs. And as I predicted, it took less than a day for Seoul, the South Korean government, called this somewhat exaggerated, while Tokyo said there was no such discussion. Like, it's just like it's tempting to say, oh, Donald Trump has ruined us forever. And it also exonerates us because it's part of this illusion that actually the world has alternatives and can just go somewhere else. And this just makes Trump look worse and blah, 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 blah. No, like in fact, it lets us off and it lets Trump off because the world doesn't really have alternatives to U.S. hegemony. Things don't actually change this quickly. And it's not going to be as simple as Japan and South Korea, two countries that the United States militarily occupies, by the way, just deciding, oh, no, they're friends with China now. And we all move on. That's not how any of this works. And like that kind of simple-minded thinking is just as, frankly, a little bit more annoying to coming from opponents from Trump, who I expect more of, as is the kind of just eye-bleeding idiocy that we're going to be talking about now for the rest of this episode from the Trump administration.
So did you get up to much this week?
Did I get up to much this week? Mostly, honestly, reading about Kurds, which is going to be our...
we'll do
part
topic.
2. Yeah, we'll do part 2 on next week on that. But today we're going to be talking about what is probably no longer quite as all-dominating as it was, but that's kind of the way...
It's settled down a bit, back to tariffs.
Yes, but the really quite extraordinary example of Donald Trump national security team roping in a hostile journalist.
Hostile. I like the idea that he kept getting invites and he's like, no, I don't want to be in.
I don't want to do this. And also the personality of the journalist himself is worth talking about, because there is almost nobody you can point to in U.S. journalistic sphere who is more pro-war than Jeffrey Goldberg.
Well, yeah, he was pro the Iraq War. That was one of the insults I was throwing at him. It was like, he was for the Iraq War, which was a terrible war. And you're like, oh, okay. I thought the Republicans were a part of that, if I remember.
This is the same Jeffrey Goldberg who infamously lied about weapons of mass destruction to get us into the Iraq War, which cost trillions of dollars and thousands of American soldiers.
Yeah, might have had something to do with it. And well, that's the most amusing thing here is that, Goldberg is really happy that the United States is bombing the Houthis and really, really desperately didn't want to spoil things for them in any way, but does have some journalistic integrity and had to lay out, like, this is insane, what happened here. The Goldberg, it's been a while since I've read any of his articles, but he actually does a pretty good job of laying out what happened here in his initial article, which came out, I think it was March 24th. The article is entitled, "The Trump Administration Accidentally Texted Me Its War Plans." And that's pretty much what happened. And Goldberg walks through his process in this article, saying, well, when I initially started getting these chats, I assumed they were fake.
Mhm.
It was quickly verified for me over the course of March 15th that, in fact, I was getting 2 hours prior notice on actual U.S. military operations in Yemen. And yeah, it was completely accurate. And at that point, he decided to get out of that room as fast as possible.
Did you hear the theory who they think they wanted to add?
Oh, no, I have not.
Darrell L. Cordell, I think his name is. He is like the commander or admiral commander of what would be the Atlantic region.
Oh, that's interesting.
So he may have been like Commander Atlantic.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
So our chief Atlantic, as in he maybe is the chief editor at the Atlantic.
Oh, that's very funny.
That's what a horrible way to die we're claiming they had heard. So I'm repeating that, but it makes sense.
That is absolutely plausible, but also does not exonerate Michael Waltz or his office in any respect.
I would like to discuss the application they were using to begin with, or as Trump referred to it as an app. At one
app.
point.
It is in fact an app.
Yes. It is probably the best app for keeping being secure if you're wanting to communicate that's available to the public. So if me and Rob wanted to keep things secure, we might use Signal. It's very like a less functional WhatsApp, but what it loses in its function, it gains in secrecy.
But so I guess Telegram is too Russian. WhatsApp is too Zuckerberg.
Telegram's a bit mad. It tends to have groups that have like hundreds or thousands of people in them. But yeah, it's a bit more boiled down than WhatsApp, but it is significantly more secure. But this is Signal. But if you are in any sort of military and any government, you will probably have your own things that are a little bit clunky. So my theory is what's happening here is, do you remember Obama used to complain about his phone?
Sure. He famously was angry that he couldn't hold on to his BlackBerry any longer.
Yes.
Which takes you back to 2008.
Oh, I thought it was that they were forcing him to use a BlackBerry when his daughters had an iPhone and he was like, I have this old BlackBerry I have to use. It was that long ago, it could be.
Barack Obama was president for 8 years, and a lot of things changed in 8 years.
Yeah.
So that could have been the case. But the initial stories that I recall was that he really valued running his own communications through his own BlackBerry, which in 2008, 2009, and then when he became president, he could no longer do so because I think A, presidents shouldn't be handling that sort of thing, and B, it would be kind of illegal for him to hold on to his own.
Yeah, but essentially it's like if there's a phone you want to use, it'll probably be very old because they've spent a lot of time and money making it super secure, which might lose some functionality. So it feels like they've had something similar where it's like, oh, this is the program you're supposed to use and it's very clunky and it's difficult. And they're like, these people are incredibly arrogant. So they're like, we'll just use the most secure thing we can download in the App Store. And the problem with the convenience of it is you can accidentally add just random people, like someone from the Atlantic.
It's clear that from the ease with which this was adopted by anybody, this was not the first time they had set up a Signal communications group. Yeah, I mean, the fact that there's a
communications group makes it sound significantly more high level than it is.
Yeah, well, it's the Houthi PC small group, which is the Houthi Principals Committee small group, and it's clear that it is normal for high-level people in the Trump administration to do government work and communicate through the Signal app, which is almost certainly illegal, is exactly the sort of thing that Hillary Clinton was dinged for so mightily. Oh, but her emails, the very suggestion that she may have maintained separate communications strategies are, one of the many straws or boulders really that broke the camel's back of her campaign in 2016. So it is, I guess, if you're the kind of person who can be surprised anymore, it is somewhat surprising to see the Donald Trump administration foreign policy crew communicating on this level of informality and almost certainly illegality. One of the more amusing things about this story was Jeffrey Goldberg, who again is like loves the military industrial complex. When I think of a military industrial complex reporter, I'm usually thinking of Jeffrey
Wow.
Goldberg. Like he basically put out this story and was like, "Hey, here's all this, but I'm there was definitely confidential information on here I'm not going to share." And then because, again, the Trumpers are idiots and don't know how to handle anything, swore up and down for 2 days that no, Jeffrey Goldberg was evil, Democrat, deep state, blah, 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 blah. And he was lying about
Hmm.
it. And so Jeffrey Goldberg said, well, hey, here's the confidential information. It's just a gobsmackingly idiotic handling of this on every level.
And they keep using the term sucked in to make it out like he was in the wrong.
Yes. Yeah, it's just extraordinary. Like a journalist. And I think there was some dispute about this. It's interesting. I did look into Jeffrey Goldberg, and for a lot of people on the sort of specifically sort of anti-war left or restrainers or whatnot, like Jeffrey Goldberg is this sort of evil boogeyman guy. And I think, honestly, reading about him, I think that goes a little bit too far. He's obviously not somebody who should be one of the most powerful journalists in the country with his record of bloodthirsty warmongering and outright failure specifically with his Iraq war advocacy. He is someone who I disagree with his promotion, but he doesn't seem like a monster. And I think that his decision to swiftly jump off of this Signal chat, which I think a lot of people were condemning, it kind of makes sense. Like,
Well, originally he thought it was a prank. I guess April Fool's is coming up, and he was like, "Oh, this can't be real," which I guess is a normal thing. But if this happened to you, Rob, what would you do?
Oh, I have a very firmly established. I'd probably start an argument. Be like, "What the hell am I doing here? Who are you morons?" Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, that specific situation when
Because it's different because you're like an independent journalist. You're not going to be defended by one of the most wealthy magazines in the country. But
yeah, by literally Steve Jobs' money. So because I believe it was Steve Jobs' widow owns the Atlantic. I mean, personally, I have zero interest in any kind of classified information. I think part of why the controversy over this is, yes, the clear idiocy, the clear hypocrisy, but the fact that Goldberg and company have tried to make this about, cherished national secrets that are they're like, these people are idiots. You learn more. I say this with great and even more confidence. You will learn more about Yemen with half an hour of More Freedom Foundation content than you will from 6 years of sitting around with any of the morons on this chat. These people know nothing about national security. These people know nothing about Yemen. They know nothing about the Middle East. They know nothing about defending sea lanes. All they know about is how to navigate certain political bureaucracies and certain national security bureaucracies. It was something that I used to say about the old Bush administration, that they were bureaucratically brilliant people.
Yeah.
This is sort of sub. Bureaucratically brilliant, meaning that they knew how to get the U.S. national apparatus to do things, but knew absolutely nothing else about the world or geopolitics or the region they were attempting to shape. These people are clearly even dumber. Like, say what you want about Dick Cheney, but he wouldn't have, been this stupid. I don't think, you know. So these people are, and it's
Would you
sad.
expect better from Mike Waltz? Because, like, he is a
No,
Green Beret. Like, he should know a lot of basics about security.
I have tremendous. We've talked about this before, Ray. I have tremendous respect for people who have chosen to put their life on the line, serve their country, what have you. But no, these are brave people. These are brave, brave people, and I have infinite respect for them and everything. Being in the U.S. military actually makes you less knowledgeable about the countries you are bombing.
Particularly if you're an American soldier, because America is so all-powerful. It can feel like you haven't really left America in some regards.
Exactly, and there's no worse way to try to get to know a country than to go in and shoot people, and be being shot at. So I have infinite respect for the courage and the bravery of people who choose to serve or what have you, and negative respect for them as and not. I'm not saying that you can't be a savvy analyst of international politics and the politics of a region that you've traveled to as a soldier. It's just really hard. It's just really hard to change that. So yeah, I have no. But no, Mike Waltz is basically a brain dead hawk.
Mm.
That's why he was hired. He was hired because he works for Dick Cheney. He was hired because he could be relied upon by our military industrial complex to say stupid, brain dead, warmonger stuff. He is, I think, has been fairly characterized as sort of the leader of the war hawk wing of the Trump administration. And I'll be honest, Rory, I find it a little satisfying that he's now revealed himself to be a complete effing moron.
Are you shocked at how, I guess this is sort of the Trump administration, is anytime they're faced with an accusation, they double down. But it's the fact that it's been like, oh, clearly they were lying from the beginning. It's been quite cathartic, do you think?
I guess it's cathartic, but I knew this already.
But usually they don't get caught out in such a spectacular fashion.
It has been nice. There's been some intellectual consistency from some anti-war, Tucker Carlson seems to be having positive interventions, sort of anti-war MAGA people who are expressing, well, Carlson isn't expressing any regret over Trump's election, but are being like, hey, if this, I think there's a comedian, Dave Smith, is sort of saying, hey, if these guys actually do invade Iran, I will absolutely admit that I regret my vote for Donald Trump. But it's and I have some respect for that. But honestly, what did you expect? What if you'd paid any attention to Donald Trump's first term? Why did you expect that this clown car would be any better? And it's hard to be pleased. Jeffrey Goldberg is, I think, amusingly being attacked by this group of war fanatic idiots for being a war fanatic idiot. Jeffrey Goldberg is a war fanatic idiot. I was kind of actually interested to see, I mean, this is just from his Wikipedia page, but Goldberg famously was a prison guard for the Israeli Defense Forces.
Wow.
So this is a guy this is during the first Intifada. He's about a decade older than I am. He's in his mid-50s. It does actually appear that I was surprised to find it appears like there's been more of an intellectual journey from this guy than I think he typically gets credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently he attained Israeli citizenship. And in an interview in 2013, he actually...
Yeah, because he's born in New York.
But he actually is no longer a dual national and gave up his Israeli citizenship because he said that he saw Israel as trending in ways that it has trended. I would not be surprised if after October 7th, he is, like many folks with his background, found himself recommitted to genocide. But no, I mean, there is some ambivalence here. This guy is not, in fact, the ravening, blood-soaked monster of leftist critique. He does seem to have actually thought about these issues to some degree. That said, he is absolutely very, very pro-war guy who wants more war, and his main concern with the Trump administration is that they are not warmongery enough. So that it is interesting.
What
that
sort
this
of
is
wars
kind of
do you think Goldberg would want the Trump regime to be up to?
Well, certainly. I mean, it's. I haven't done an in-depth analysis of Goldberg's current agitation, but certainly he wanted the Iraq War, and he put out reporting that certainly proved to be untrue. and I think is depicted by a lot of people as being outright fraudulent reporting, claiming that Saddam Hussein was directly connected to al-Qaeda, which was always pretty nonsensical. This is a guy who was 100% on board with the whole Iraq War project, and has continued to be very pro-war in the time since. He would not, of course, depict it as pro-war, but being, pro-national security, pro-American defense. And I mean, most importantly, like, it's not so much his writing that matters at this point. He is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and The Atlantic, in the aftermath of October 7th, it's calmed down a little bit now, was putting out a lot of the most rabidly ignorant stuff about what the appropriate things were for the U.S. government to do, the Israeli government to do. I remember in particular there was this very long article from Simon Sebag Montefiore that was just. I enjoy Simon Sebag Montefiore's books on Russia, but his book on Jerusalem actually played a key part in sort of like stamping out my residual Zionism, because it was so plainly fraudulent to me, and that was before I was as educated on this issue as I am. And that one Montefiore article on like the history of Jerusalem and the Palestinian issue was just so deeply offensive to me, even before Israel had killed, the plausibly hundreds of thousands they've killed since. So yeah, I mean, The Atlantic is absolutely a pro-war, pro-Israel, pro-worst parts of Israel publication, full stop. And Jeffrey Goldberg's the guy in charge. So I think that is the case. But he is also somebody who thinks of himself as a journalist, and I think has some fairly, and just the fact that he is humiliating the Trump administration for bombing Yemen, which I think is something that he very clearly supports. And it's interesting just in the character of Jeffrey Goldberg, this contradiction between journalistic basics and being put into this position where he's like, I desperately don't want to do anything to undermine. And, and basically in the second article, there's sort of one of the most egregious, more horrifying texts is like, oh yeah, he went into his girlfriend's building and then we collapsed it.
Yeah.
Which is a really strong indication that the Trump administration has gone full Israel on its just bloodthirstiness and, willing to knock down whole apartment buildings to get a single guy, which is, just a nightmarish fall in our principles that Goldberg really didn't want to include into his first article. But because he was a good journalist whose journalistic instincts were being challenged, he then felt compelled to put out that information.
Well, I've heard that with most journalists, it's a bit like they'll only be on the side of a certain politician to a certain degree. And quite often they'll only, report on something once it's already released. So it looks like you're being neutral when you're not. But if a story like this just lands in your lap, you're like...
And so I think it's interesting. So Mike Waltz claims to have never spoken to Jeffrey Goldberg. And like, I think something that's getting really undermined here, and a lot of more right-wing sort of peace MAGA people have emphasized, that is very worth emphasizing, is that Michael Waltz and Jeffrey Goldberg see the world in very similar ways. They are representatives in a way that J.D. Vance is not, Pete Hegseth may not necessarily be. They are representatives of the uniparty, the classic bipartisan approach to the world, where what's important is the United States bombing everything all the time, and this is the way the world should be. Jeffrey Goldberg, the Atlantic journalist, and Michael Waltz, the idiotic national security advisor who created this security breach, are completely in line, not completely, but mostly in line with the way that they see the world. And it makes perfect sense that Michael Waltz would have Jeffrey Goldberg in his contact list. And Goldberg even refers to it at the beginning of his article. He's like, oh, well, I was excited and interested to see that Michael Waltz had put me on a Signal chat. Perhaps he wanted to reach out. And it wasn't strange for Jeffrey Goldberg or Michael Waltz to think that, oh, this would be a good leak connection where Michael Waltz, the national security advisor, would talk to Jeffrey Goldberg and give him information that makes the war machine look good. That seemed quite natural to Jeffrey Goldberg, and was natural enough to Michael Waltz for Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number to be in his In the article, Goldberg is careful to point out, I would certainly never be included in a principals committee of this nature. That was shocking to me. He never says it was shocking to him that he might have been
Privy to the information that was in it afterwards.
or say contacted by a Donald Trump national security advisor. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if there was a lot of that going on in the first Trump administration.
Something that's clunky can be have better security, because the idea of something on your phone just means you can literally just add randoms to a chat. So he might have been lucky, and well, that gives the other idea that not only is this these chats happened before, but other people could have been added before this that had just kept things quiet.
Of course, yeah, no question.
Are you worried that this is an escalation with the Trump administration? Because we've talked about before how America usually kill people with the likes of drones. I know these were missiles. It's a bit different, but it's like you study the target for days, could be months. You get a +1, +2, +3, which means you can kill that person plus so many other people. In this attack, 61 people have been killed and 80 or 98 wounded. Like, this is just a horrendous, like, yeah, just kill everyone in the village.
Well, see, but this isn't a village, Rory. The Trump administration is bombing apartment buildings in the middle of Yemen's capital city for the crime of opposing Israel's genocide. It's getting lost in all the other disasters the Republicans are causing, but urban Yemen is now being bombed harder than it has been at any point since the Houthis established deterrence with the Gulf states back in 2022. Anti-war Donald Trump has brought us back to routine mass murder in Yemen, and it won't work out any better for us than it did for the Saudis and the Emiratis. This obviously isn't going to stop the Houthis. That's an interesting question. Yes, I would say yes. This is like falling down to Israel's level in terms of what used to come up a lot, but doesn't come up so much anymore because the comparison no longer works well for Gaza. In the taking of both Mosul and Raqqa, I don't know what the ratios, the acceptable ratios of dead civilians were, but in the taking of both Mosul and Raqqa from the Islamic State in, I want to say, 2016, 2017, everybody acknowledges that the level of civilian casualties was horrific from U.S. bombing. Is this particular campaign yet a full-on departure for the U.S. government? I'd say it's too soon to tell. I mean, we killed another 4 people last night. So it's a 2-week-old campaign. I would honestly kind of expect it to peter out. This is a step up from what the Biden administration was doing. It's not going to be effective, though. It's essentially part of the Biden administration's reticence in bombing Yemen was that a lot of one of their great early accomplishments was stopping bombing Yemen. The outset of the Biden administration and throughout the Trump administration, Saudi Arabia and the UAE were horrifically bombing Yemen with no concern for civilians, just really nasty, nasty stuff. And the Biden administration took some positive steps to stop that. So it was quite humiliating and quite frustrating to them after actually having the expertise built up within the Biden administration that said, actually, if we blow up Hodeidah port, if we blow up this, that, and the other thing, we're going to yield large-scale starvation, and we're not going to do anything against the Houthis because the Saudis and the UAE, with U.S. intelligence support, had been trying to destroy the Houthis for a decade and failing.
When you say about these idiots not knowing anything about Yemen, is that the sort of thing you get the feeling they probably don't know or don't care about, that this is being tried and tried again and it didn't really achieve its goals?
Well, at one point, Hegseth says nobody knows anything about the Houthis. And well, I would dispute that. I think any audience for the More Freedom Foundation knows a good deal about the Houthis. But everybody who has watched a couple More Freedom Foundation videos knows a lot more about the Houthis than anybody on that national security chat. And you could see this and that was sort of an interesting thing. So Goldberg said that one of the things that convinced him this was authentic and not some kind of trap was the level of foreign policy insight was impossible outside of, and I was like, level of foreign policy insight? These people are morons. The one thing, so there's been a lot of talk of J.D. Vance's sort of contempt for Europe or something on this.
The sort of thing. When I first heard about this, I was like, oh, this is probably leaked on purpose. because it's still on the message of Europe's terrible and we're great, and you're like, this is entirely to help Israel.
But what people aren't talking about in the context of this European chat was how absolutely farcical the assumptions were. So what they're talking about Europe is like, well, Europe's got to pay for our expenses here when we reopen navigation, and it's just like, reopen navigation. Like, you guys aren't you clearly don't understand how like insurance markets work.
Mhm.
Like if somehow if the US government, and I don't think this would even work, if the United States government literally used nuclear weapons on Sana'a, Hodeidah, and multiple other Yemeni cities, murdered 50 to 60% of the population of Yemen, created a nuclear wasteland, there would still be somebody there who would be vastly more invested in taking pot shots at shipping across the Red Sea. So there's no way you can militarily solve this issue, even if the Trump administration was willing to be infinitely more brutal and waste infinitely more money than the Biden administration did on this. And the Biden administration, to be clear, wasted a lot of money on this. And I think the Trump administration is very unlikely to continue bombing Yemen at the level of brutality or comprehensiveness that even the Biden administration did, and certainly not that the Saudis and the UAE did. I'll admit, I've been surprised at how effective Israeli air bombing has been against Hezbollah. I think more or less exactly what I would have expected had happened in Gaza with Hamas. But no, like Hezbollah, like they really, like the Israeli just bombing only. They quickly found out they couldn't do any kind of ground fighting. But bombing only, Israel was surprisingly successful in pushing Hezbollah into certainly not destruction, but a sort of please stop hurting us position. The Houthis, 1,000 miles away. I mean, Hezbollah is literally over the border from Israel, by like, as far away as I am from, I don't know, Brooklyn, from Upper Manhattan. The Houthis are 1,000 miles away from Israel. The Hezbollah is a organization that has a recruitment base of as high as plausible as possible, maybe about 1 million people. Shia in Lebanon, maybe 1.5 Shia in Lebanon, who are situated in an appropriate way to support Hezbollah. It's a very small population. Like the Houthis, it's 1,000 miles away, plausible support base of 20 to 30 million people that rises with every Israeli airstrike. Lebanon, the Houthi militia in Lebanon and Israel have sort of had like a sort of balance of terror for a couple decades. There was no balance in Yemen. It was just straight up terror bombing by Saudi Arabia and the UAE for a decade, and the Houthis got stronger with every bomb. So yeah, it's just this confident assertion by Michael Waltz specifically that, yes, of course, we'll figure out how to charge Europe once we open up the sea lanes. And it's just like, these innocent children know nothing of what they speak. And it just, they're like, the trumpet, I can say with great confidence that unless they get a ceasefire, the Trump administration will not be a ceasefire in Gaza. Specifically, the Houthis have been very clear and were there was all this talk that, oh, the Houthis, they're bad. They're just malicious people. They're going to keep bombing no matter what Israel does. And the second that Israel stopped bombing Gaza, the Houthis reopened the Red Sea. They announced, when it was clear that Israel was starving Gaza to death in anticipation of a restarted military effort on March 18th, the Houthis said, okay, we're going to start targeting Israeli shipping again. And then the Trump administration decided to start bombing. So in fact, U.S. shipping wasn't under any threat when these guys decided they were going to go do their heroic reopening of the shipping lanes.
Well, it was not the argument. It was like, only like 5% of America's stuff goes through here. It's mostly Europe, so they're totally indebted to us.
Yeah, I mean, just the sheer idiot arrogance of these children. They just have no idea what they're talking about or what's going on here. And that's which is very typical. I mean, that's very Biden administration as well. That's very Obama administration. That's very Trump administration. But like, at least in certainly very Bush administration, at least in the Obama and Biden administrations, there was some counterweight of some people who had any idea what they were talking about. None of that is in evidence on these chats that Goldberg has revealed.
Are you shocked at sort of the bloodlust that's sort of in these messages?
Not even a little bit.
Because it just seems to be like they're just in such joy that he's dead and the girlfriend's dead and all this here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're idiots. They think they're doing something positive. They are a bunch of middle-aged men who get think they're compensating for something with a hot sports car. And what's a hotter sports car than a bunch of F-35s with a bunch of missiles?
It would make you do a fist pump, an American flag, and a fire emoji.
It would not make me do that. I mean, they're not serious people.
No.
Nobody working in U.S. foreign policy has been serious people. Did you see this was an amazing story? We did a whole episode talking about Brett McGurk. Do you remember that particularly disgusting character?
Yeah.
This guy who's basically been running Middle East foreign policy for the United States for like 20 years under Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. And you know what? I wouldn't be very surprised, honestly, Rory, if once Waltz and all these clowns get fired, he'll walk back into the Trump administration again. But he apparently was at some kind of disgusting pro-genocide event and was getting lectured for being insufficiently supportive of Israel, which is just extraordinary. And you know what? I hope that's what the rest of his crappy little life is.
What just being said, he didn't do enough.
Going to events thrown by genociders who he did everything he possibly could to support, and getting castigated for not being good enough at being a heartless monster.
But could you see him coming back and it would be like adults in the room?
100%. I think if Brett McGurk came back into the Trump administration, even after angrily resigning in, I think, 2018 or thereabouts from the Trump administration, before coming back to the Biden administration, for something that Trump didn't actually end up doing, which was taking troops out of Syria. Yeah, if he were to come back after his resignation, Jeffrey Goldberg would probably write, oh, the adults are back. Oh, thank gosh, we've got a steady hand at the tiller in the Middle East again. I don't know. Maybe Jeffrey Goldberg has a little more self-respect than that, but Brett Steffens at like the New York Times, that guy sure doesn't, and would probably write that story.
Could you see this reducing the Trump administration's likelihood of starting a big war, since there's basic things going wrong, or could you see them just being so ignorant they accidentally trigger something?
It's a great question. A fantastic result from this controversy would be Michael Waltz getting thrown out on his ass. Because he's just, I mean, he's as bog standard, simple neocon a guy as you can imagine. He staffed his office with a bunch of warmongers. If we could get rid of Michael Waltz, this would be a great result for
as of
everybody.
recording, America hasn't invaded Greenland and or Canada.
Nor do I expect America to do any of those things. J.D. Vance did a big tour in Greenland this week.
Yeah, no one would turn up to see him.
Yes. And said a lot of stuff. And I thought it was pretty, actually, even J.D. Vance, who is very careful, as he was in these revealed chats, who's very careful to be respectful of Donald Trump and to always be kissing ass. Even he was like, we're not really doing this, are we? Like he was just sort of like, in his Greenland stuff, he was like, we're just asking some national security questions,
Because as you pointed out in one of your videos, like, you still haven't fully incorporated Alaska, because it has a population of 800,000, which for American standards isn't a lot. It's less than 1 million.
Well, and this is a dynamic that is very much permeates the group chat here. Like, these people don't know anything. They haven't read any books. They haven't read, like, I'm quite convinced that, like, nobody with a national security clearance at the United States level knows more about the world of geopolitics than I do. Like at this point, nobody. Like, there's nothing that, and this is sort of an answer to a question that you asked earlier, like there's nothing that confidential information from the United States government could teach me, other than like evil stuff that the US government has done that we don't know about yet. Like these people are idiots. There's no worthwhile intelligence. Maybe there is at lower levels, but there's none of it's making its way up to the top. None of it's being absorbed. And what people know about, just to connect it back to Greenland, what people know about this is, people at this level know about this is just vibes and nonsense that they've gotten from think tanks. So this whole Greenland thing, like, oh, the national security, we're just asking questions, is nonsense that US Navy affiliated think tanks have been putting out, that like, oh, well, the climate change, so now there's some natural gas we could access, and nobody's ever going to want that natural gas because it's going to be too expensive. It is layers upon layers of BS that, like, J.D. Vance doing his logical, well, we're just asking sensible national security questions. And Jonah Goldberg would agree with him that this is a sensible national security question, because a bunch of like semi-literate think tanks have been like, oh, climate change, we can militarize a whole nother place of the world now, even though there's zero strategic benefit in doing so. Yes, of course, Russia can send nukes at us over Greenland, but like these are strategic questions that were answered 50 years ago by NORAD and whatnot. This is not new data. We have military bases in Greenland that are meant to do the things that are actually useful. There's no national security benefit in the United States taking Greenland, and there's certainly no, like, oh, we're going to send out new pioneers. Like, what world are you living
it's significantly less fertile. Like, it's very mountainous, while Alaska is, there's a lot more soil. You can actually do something there. Is America going through, like, what I'm going to refer to as a Liz Truss moment, where usually it's like you have politicians that know how far they can sort of get lobbyists and think tanks. But Liz Truss just felt like she was a think tank, and anything they said she did. Like, are people just like, oh, the think tank said this, so yeah, let's take Greenland? Like, are we just slowly finding out that they need to have a massive failures and then they can move on?
There's so many layers to that question.
Yeah,
That's
sorry.
a great question. So Washington, D.C. is filled with think tank morons and bad ideas that are sold as good ideas, like the whole Greenland thing, for years before somebody comes in and picks them up. Liz Truss, I think, very much was like, I'm going to do exactly what the most right-wing think tanks have been claiming for years, and it's going to go great. And honestly, now that I think about it, I think Elon Musk is more of a Liz Truss figure. And I think he's going through like, wait a second, all of my like, libertarianism for 18-year-old think tanks, like the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute, said that all these things would be a good thing to do. Why does everybody hate me? That's kind of I think that's actually, Elon, that's a great little video there, actually. Like, Elon Musk is Liz Truss. It's just sort of like, oh, wait, no, these are terrible ideas that aren't good for anybody. It's just sort of red meat for rich people donors that get things in the think tankosphere. Donald Trump is not that. Donald Trump is, as we're recording, I haven't actually parsed out is Donald Trump going to get to the point with tariffs, or is he going to back down again? This is, we're recording on April 2nd. That's sort of the big question of the...
What is that? It's not Freedom Day. What's it called?
Liberation Day, maybe?
Yes.
By the time it's very exciting, because by the time we've finished our 2-hour recording session, we do 2 of these every time, the world economy could be crashed, or he could have backed down entirely and everything's greener than green can imagine, or it's something in the middle. But that's Donald Trump, like, has convictions that certainly aren't out of the modern think tank world, and has some things that he does believe deeply. So I wouldn't compare Donald Trump to Liz Truss. I think he has some preoccupations around trade and immigration that are certainly not ideas that he came up with, but he is less, I don't want to seem to say something positive about Donald Trump, but he is, like, compared to Elon Musk, he's actually put a little bit of thought and dedication into these ideas instead of just allowing some idiot to provide him a failing program.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just another dynamic to that question you asked, it's like, the United States is not the United Kingdom. At a certain point, bond vigilantes mattered, and I think that's what took out Liz Truss. The United Kingdom operates in something like a financial real world. Like it actually, there are consequences.
Famously, George Soros bet against the pound and kind of ruined the UK in the 90s.
Yes, that is a story, the dynamics of
Mhm.
which I don't. It's in 1992 or
Yeah.
something like that. He caused a
I
run
always
on the
just find it
pound.
strange that they let him out like he's this mad maverick lefty, and you're like, no.
Yeah. Well, the way people make their money and what they choose to do with their money can often be different things. The United Kingdom does have responsibilities. I think what Truss wanted to do specifically was cut taxes to the bone and do deficit spending on top of that. And the folks who own British government debt were like, hey, wait a second. And could Donald Trump push us to a moment like that? Sure. Especially if this insane tax cut goes through. It's a much harder thing to have happen. I think in the 20th century, in the latter 20th century, when the United States was just recently off the gold standard, it was more plausible that Wall Street or some other transnational financial entity could hold the United States to account. I think one of the main lessons of first the 2008 financial crisis and then the 2020 financial crisis is that the bond vigilantes do not intimidate the United States. And that's sort of to the point that I started out this episode talking about. Yeah, it's fun to have a headline like, oh my God, China, South Korea, and Japan are working together against us. Like, it's not that easy. It's not that straightforward. The United States could have a Liz Truss moment. That's interesting. I wrote a book where like the sort of the many different falls of the British Empire, I think it really sort of happened in 1917. The Suez Crisis in the 1950s is a great indicator. Like actually like the Liz Truss moment of like, what was that, 2022?
Yeah,
or
right when this podcast started.
Yeah, that's actually that's kind of, Brexit is certainly another fall of the British Empire, but that Liz Truss moment, I think, as well. And I don't think, I mean, it's possible, but it does kind of seem, was it Alice from Queens on Twitter says that, if the S&P 500 falls 10%, it can, the common measure of U.S. Stocks, if the S&P 500 falls 10%, Donald Trump can be dissuaded from any policy choice, no matter how much he believes in it. So yeah, I don't think the possibility of a Liz Truss moment for the United States under Donald Trump is particularly likely. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing to think about.
Anything else you gleaned from knowing all this top secret information?
Yes. Well, just extraordinary, like the idea that these schmucks are confidently talking about is like preemptively like high-fiving. Like, yeah, after we reopen the sea lanes, how are we going to build Europe? And it's just like, what world are you living in? Like this idea that like, oh, we're tougher than Biden, we're tougher than Obama, we're going to do everything better. And it's just like, nah, man, that's not actually how the world works. I could see some people in the Trump administration having this image of things because they don't really understand why they defeated ISIS so quickly.
Yeah.
They defeated ISIS massively, like just destroyed ISIS in 2017. In part, that was a story of being incredibly brutal to Mosul and Raqqa. But the most important thing that the Trump administration did to defeat ISIS was to stop funding ISIS. Because like the United States, CIA had massive CIA programs that were funneling money and weapons to jihadists in northern Syria. And of course, no, not the Islamic State, but guys who were, fighting in the trenches alongside the Islamic State or like would join the Islamic State. So basically, as soon as the United States government stopped funding the Islamic State like dried up and blew away. That is not the Houthis.
No.
That is not what's going on with the Houthis who have spent the past decade, really the past 2 decades being targeted by the United States and their allies and have gone from strength to strength because of that. So I kind of get how these people who don't know much about the world or what their own government is doing could get this illusion like, oh, well, Obama couldn't defeat the Islamic State and then we didn't. So you didn't. Like Trump actually personally kind of did it by turning off the CIA taps to the Islamic State. This was not military might, U.S. military power. Like, no, it was not doing that. It was the Islamic State was defeated because we stopped funding the Islamic State. So it doesn't mean, yeah. So just that this sort of lack of connection to reality. Obviously, we should, which we have not done in this conversation, because I guess we are typical political commentators to some extent, as we have not centered the struggle of Yemen, just how crap this is. Yeah, Sanaa's being bombed again. For the people of Sana'a, this is deeply sad, but nothing new. This is a war that is largely over. It has been, I believe, since 2022, since large-scale bombing of populated areas in Yemen has been ongoing. 3 years later, here we are back again. It's been not as spectacular as the first night or so, but my understanding is that U.S. military bombing of civilian areas in Yemen it's a thing again now. Will this impact the Houthis in any serious way? Absolutely not.
No.
There were some statements in the first
But he was the head of the whole thing, and without the head, they can't do anything.
Oh yeah. There's no claims that they got.
He was like the head of the rockets. Seemed to be.
Yes, exactly. Well, and also my understanding is, so that claim was made initially that we had taken out many leaders in the first night, and I've heard that there's a rocket guy, but is there even a name associated to him? It's almost kind of fortuitous that for the Trump administration that Michael Waltz is such an idiot and created this particular news kerfluffle.
Their top missile guy is literally what's written by Mike Waltz.
Yeah, in the chat, but has there been any follow-up on that? My understanding is that there's been very little clarity from the Trump administration about who else they might have gotten. They said leaders. And usually the Houthi leadership, we know who Abdul Malik al-Houthi is. I haven't been looking into Yemen as much this month, so none of the other names are leaping to mind, but we know who is in charge of the Houthi militaries. We know who their bomb guys are, their missile guys. I haven't heard a serious name. When the Biden or Trump administrations take out yet another new leader of the Islamic State, we get names, we get biographies, we get photographs. Not seeing any of that from these Yemen airstrikes, which leads me to believe that they're not actually hitting anybody of note. They're just blowing up civilians in a very Israeli fashion.
But I find it fascinating when they're like, we're bailing out Europe, and you're like, what did you expect the Italian Navy to be doing this? Like, nobody would do this unless they're incredibly rich and stupid, which Saudi Arabia is. And America seems like, yeah, it just feels like genuinely that, well, it was to protect Israel, but it's like, it looks like we're doing something. Aren't we great?
Yeah. And obviously, I think probably the best closing thing to leave this with is, if you want to guarantee freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, do what Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump did at the outset of the Trump administration and stop the genocide in Gaza. When the Trump administration, I'll give them credit for that. Genocide Joe will always have my hatred, but Genocide Donnie will also earn it. But it is worth, even 2 weeks in to the horror, the renewed horror in Gaza. I mean, that's still, 60, 70% of Donald Trump's time in power. Israel was not allowed to do mass murder in Gaza. There's still time for Trump and Witkoff to stop this genocide and restore freedom of navigation. That's a really straightforward, easy way to do this. That none of the morons on this group chat, this Signal group chat,
appreciate,
seem capable of even conceiving of.
So it's all Europe's fault, as we're agreed.
Oh, agreed, 100%. Those. Yeah, imagine those greedy Europeans who won't arm up to solve all these problems that the United States has created for them.
Though that started another problem, Rob.
Yeah.
Europe doesn't want to just buy American equipment. They're thinking about building their own.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Okay.
I think most Europeans, heads of state, understand that this is bribe money rather than actually anything that's going to be useful for military equipment. So yeah, they'll talk a good game and still.
So no Rheinmetall stocks for you then?
No, I mean, it could be trajectory changing for Rheinmetall if Europe goes from paying, from spending 70% of its weapons money on U.S. weapons to 65% of its weapons money. I think left out of that, oh, Europe's definitely cutting down, is that if Europe actually jacks up defense spending to the extent that it does, cutting from 70% down to 50% U.S. weapons still means a lot more money for U.S. weapons. I don't know. I think I would love it if Germany and Europe had sort of its own, was a little more independent, but I don't expect it. Yeah, we can talk about the independence of Europe and the rearmament of Germany when...
So you can't see it going a bit more Charles de Gaulle then?
Not really. I mean, maybe. But yeah, we can start talking about that when we see the United States kicked out of, was it Ramstein, the airbase?
Ramstein, but yeah, even if, they are heavily militarized, I can't see them kicking them out, but time will tell.
Time will tell. Time will
Ciao,
tell.
ciao, and stop adding random people to chats.
Yes, that too. That too.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.